everyone, to another episode of the Nearshore Cafe podcast. I'm Brian Samson, your host, a Nearshore entrepreneur, and we bring light to all these amazing stories of people doing business in and around Latin America. If you're interested in localization, wow, this is going to be a great episode for you. Before we get into that and meeting our guest, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Plug Technologies, plugg.tech. Plug's a great way to connect all the amazing talent from Latin America to growing U.S. companies. But without further ado, let's meet our localization expert, Julio Madrid. Julio, so nice to meet you.
Hi, Brian. Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Julio, there's a lot of people listening that know what localization is, but not everyone does. Some may just think it's translation. Like, what exactly is this industry? Can you share more for maybe a beginner and then build into it a little bit?
Absolutely. Yes. Actually, the first time I heard localization, I thought it had something to do with GPS and finding and searching for things. But basically, what it is, to put it in a simplified way, I call it enhanced translation. So it's the definition or textbook definition would be to adapt a product, service, software, or any content from one language into a different language and adapt it to a specific culture or region. So basically, it's put in let's say, an application or a software in English that you create probably in the US, adapted to Mexican Spanish, which is in my case what I work with the most. Or you can have, let's say, a Chinese soap opera or TV series, and then you want to adapt it to English or Mexican Spanish. That is the localized process, is to adapt it in a way that makes sense culturally. And this allows companies to actually create a closer connection and develop more of a customer satisfaction or consumer satisfaction when you're speaking the language and in a more personal level to the consumer.
Interesting. So let's maybe take an example. So Amazon works in Mexico. How might Amazon think about their web app and their mobile app if someone's using it in the States and then they, use it from Mexico City, or a Mexican is using it versus someone in the States? How might a company like Amazon think about it?
It's funny that you mentioned Amazon because that was like my first experience of in a big company or in a big project working on localization. And back then, and I'm talking about this project I did with Amazon was 2013.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, we had only machine translations. We didn't have neural machine translations, so it was basically more handwork, not so much automation as we have now with large language models. So the aspect of what Amazon would do for localization, let's say you sell avocados, right? And you're in California. And Amazon is a platform for small sellers and small companies that you put up your product up in their catalog, and it's the Amazon website, but you're selling as a small company your avocados. And you want to sell it in Mexico and you want to sell it in Chile as well. So the localization process for your small store on the Amazon platform would be to actually adapt the product and the service that you offer to that particular locale. We call it locale, which is Mexico and Chile. And, in Mexico and in Chile, we speak Spanish, but we use different Spanish for different words. As you well know, in Latin America, it's a whole variety of words that we have for the same thing. So, for instance, avocado in Mexican is aguacate, but in Chile you might say palta, perdón. So palta, and then there are so many other regions within Chile that name it differently. So you're in California and avocados, they're avocados, and you want to sell also guacamole. So what the Amazon platform does with the localization department is to take your product and adapt it to that particular region. And now you're selling aguacates in Mexico. And when I in Mexico go into the store at Amazon for your product, I see the content in Spanish, in Mexican Spanish. And at the same time, another person in Chile might be opening that same website, but they are seeing different content for the same product. So that would be the localization and the process a little bit of what Amazon would do for their products. Now they also have Prime Video, which is in itself a whole industry for localization because they have to localize the dialogues, they have to localize the content of the films and movies and the TV series, and they also do the subtitles, which in itself is a whole industry. So localization, it's, I would say, one of the main pillars of the success that Amazon has had globally.
Yeah, sounds complicated. And maybe, Amazon, I'm sure people are listening, maybe they're small business owners. Amazon, $1 trillion business, has, enormous resources. What if you're a small business and how should they think about localization?
It all depends what your product, service, or content is and who your audience is. If you are in California, you want to sell it in California, you can just have it in English, and the region adapts to the product usually as you are in the US. But as you know, in California, there's about 200 different dialects and languages spoken in a small region in the LA region. You can localize it to target a specific community. It can be the Latino community, it can be the Asian community, and then you would have to go about knowing a little bit about your audience and how your product can get adapted to it. It is really expensive if you want to do it as a small company or as a small business owner, but fortunately there are so many tools and apps and already established processes that allow you to do this in such a cheap way. Like for $30 a month you can actually get an app that does your localization processes in a way that it's like if you were in Amazon. You upload your product, but Amazon does the localization. So it's the same thing here. You can get it's like pretty much everything in life. You can get it cheaper or you can get it a lot more expensive. But the great thing about localization nowadays is that technology, as in everything in life, has allowed it to be cheaper and more democratic, let's say. Like anyone can access localization tools. And if you now bring into the picture the artificial intelligence craze, well, you pretty much get unlimited resources as let's say you get a chat GPT model and you can actually train it for it to localize the products for you. So there are many options. It's so funny because you might be, let's say, a small two-employee company against Amazon, but the website and the content is going to look exactly the same.
Oh,
Amazon is investing billions, but
yeah,
you're just going to be investing a little bit, and that's the beauty of it.
yeah. Are there any apps or tools, maybe AI tools, that you call out for being better than others?
Jesus, AI, it's a whole phenomenon. When I started working in localization, we didn't have large language models per se, but we were developing them, creating this machine translation and deep learning. And then these large language models came to be. And the GPT, not to get too technical, but the GPT, it's sort of like a, a transformer, let's say. It's an intelligent database that knows what to take from that particular database depending on what you request.
Hmm.
So if I see it in a technical aspect, pretty much all the large language models that we have today are basically the same,
Hmm.
but it would all depend on how you train it, which is the beauty of AI. that you can personalize it if you're a small business, for instance, and you don't want to put your personal or private information out there to the cloud and the databases that large language models use. You can actually download it locally and train it. And to do that, they are all based on the same data. They basically scraped all the same data from the internet. So in the end, they are the same. But what's going to make the difference? It's on the prompt or the request that you make on this particular GPT. And I would say, there are so many apps that are based on AI, but they are giving you the user experience. That's what they're selling, because
Mm.
the content and the process is the same. So I don't personally have a favorite one.
Hmm.
um, I work on a daily basis training AI and neural networks to do, specifically in the project that I am right now, it's to do retail and e-commerce in the localization aspect. So it doesn't matter what you decide to use, as long as you know what you need it for
Hmm.
and you tune it to that particular objective.
Interesting. Interesting. Can you maybe help us understand like just the history of this world of localization? Is there a period of time that you can look at like, okay, this is when it started, this is when it really took off, and if there was any catalyst of why?
Well, if I get inspired here, I can go back to the Babylonians and Egypt for localization and how they were localizing, content back then. And with the Rosetta Stone, basically, it's sort of like the localization foundation. Um, as I mentioned earlier, localization for me is enhanced translation.
Hmm.
So I can say that it's been around forever, as long as translation has existed. But the need develops when the demand for a more personal product that
Hmm.
appeals to you personally is there. Like, let's say, competition drove localization and its refinement. For instance, the globalization and democratization that technology allows us to have and access content in a matter of seconds anywhere in the world. That's what catalyzed, was like a catalyst to impulse this trajectory or this positioning that localization has nowadays. But basically, the principle is you want to offer a personalized experience to the user.
Hmm.
So what you do, you just don't translate content to Spanish, because if you use the standard Spanish, you can use it in Spain, you can use it in Argentina, Mexico, Colombia. But when you want to compete with the competition and other products and other services that are going the extra mile by being more personal and having a closer relationship with the consumer, then that forces you to actually um, adapt your product so you speak to your consumer or your your patient, your buyer, your client, whatever it is that you provide services or products. So I don't see a particular era and time where localization rocketed. I would say it came together with the internet and it came together with the globalization.
Hmm.
When content started being globalized, then the need to localization came, and it was bigger. So now companies are really thinking about using and applying localization, because fortunately, as consumers, we are smarter every day, and we just don't want a product that we go around it, or it's like, well, it's what we got to deal with it. No, we are demanding, and we are very, very, picky when it comes to options that we have. So companies know, they know this, and that's why they're investing a lot of money in localization. And I would add to that, Brian, that for me, nearshoring and localization, it's like a synonym. They come together. They're joined at the hip, because I was just talking to a Chinese company that it's actually moving to Mexico, and they said, for us, I mean, this Chinese company said, for us, there is no nearshoring without localization. They wanted first to localize the content to then move the company to Mexico from China. So I thought it was an interesting approach because now they're giving more importance to the content and
Mm.
how the employees in Mexico are going to perceive this Chinese company, not as foreign, but as a different company from outside that is actually speaking to themselves in their own language.
Mhm.
So I thought it was a great approach. So I'd say they come join at the hip,
That's cool.
nearshoring and localization.
Yeah. I'm sure the way, with all your localization training, I'm sure you can just, in your daily life, you see something and you're like, oh, that company really didn't have their localization strategy together. Without naming any companies, anything on the spot, are there maybe an example or two that you could point to of like, wow, they really botched that?
Oh God. Um, I actually have a folder in my computer of all those because they're like meme material. You can make so many memes with that. I was last week in a meeting and in this project that I was telling you about, and one of my colleagues, she's in California, and then she sends me a photo. She walked into this supermarket in the U.S. and sends me a picture. She took a picture of the aisle for dog treats. You know, when you go to the store, for the pet section, they have some dog treats, like the treats that you reward your dog with. They actually translated it into Spanish, and the translation was really bad because that meant that you were trafficking with dogs. That meant trata de perros. So trata de perros, it's actually like in Spanish, human trafficking. It's trata de personas. So trata de perros, that meant it's a terrible literal translation of dog treats. So when she sent me the picture, I'm like, dear God, we're gonna
Oh
have
my God,
PETA all over this store, and they're
this
gonna close this store because they're trafficking with dogs.
this is terrible.
So
Oh my gosh.
it is terrible because 10 years ago, you had the excuse as a
Yeah,
company that you don't speak the language and
yeah,
that you were using Google Translate.
yeah,
But today, if you go to Google Translate, if you go to DeepL, or if you go to any online translator, you will not get that translation
yeah.
because they are so advanced that they know the difference now between dog treats and trafficking with dogs. So I think the person that did that in some department in that store, they actually themselves translated the two words separately.
Yeah,
So that's how they put them together, and they said, "Oh, there we go." And it was printed. They
yeah.
had to go through proofing, but they printed. And
Oh,
like that, I have so many stories, especially from South America.
oh my gosh. Could you hit on something interesting earlier about even a region like Los Angeles? It's not a one size fits all. There's different languages, cultures. This podcast is about nearshoring. As companies, look to labor in Latin America. Maybe even just take Mexico, for example. What should a company think about? Or maybe let's apply it directly to localization of labor. You're trying to attract talent. You're trying to recruit talent from the states in Latin America. We'll say Mexico. Are there things that they should be thinking about from a localization perspective of trying to recruit somebody in Mexico City versus somebody in more of a like rural region? How should they think about that?
I think that's a great question, Brian. I've seen these processes a few times in the last 10 years. I have a small LSP, a large service provider based in Mexico City, and I've had the opportunity to subcontract or hire, outsource human resources specifically for linguists based in Mexico and Latin America for US companies. And what I've seen in the process is that although Mexico and the US, we share, the time zones and a lot of culture, and the US is specifically LA area, it's where is the second city where most Mexicans live besides Mexico metropolitan area in Mexico City. So we share a lot in common. But one of those processes, if we want to apply the localization process, not just for language, but considering the adaptation to the culture, it's corny, but I say that localization specialists, we are ambassadors for cultures. So we actually link cultures together. And one of the challenges that I've seen in companies in the US trying to recruit human resources in Latin America, it's that they speak the corporate US language that we do not speak in Latin America, and we don't speak it in Mexico. And that is a barrier. And sometimes it can be a big issue or it can be a small issue, but you know how we are in Latin America. We're very passionate, we're very warm, we're very casual, we're very we just want to give you a hug over the webcam. But corporate America, they're not like that.
Yeah.
So when they speak corporate and human resources specialists, they're trying to recruit people in Latin America. That is an opportunity that can be localized. How can you approach that? Well, you can try to recruit human resources in Latin America that have a background in Latin America, a cultural background. The U.S. is in a very lucky position because as the melting pot, you have people from all over the place. And if you put the extra advantage of hiring someone that is specifically attuned to speak to the Latino community, that will make you take more advantage of the human resources Latin America has to offer. Because as you know, and you've mentioned it before here in the podcast, the talent that we have in Latin America, it's like none other. Not like seen in Asia, not like in Europe. It's unique, and the geography that we are in gives us this advantage. So the U.S. can take advantage by localizing the processes for human resources, and I think the main perspective would be, as I mentioned earlier, get to know your audience. And you keep in mind that if you're going to hire, let's say, software engineer in Colombia, it's not going to be the same office policy or office culture as you're used to in the US. And that can actually be a great advantage. Mm-hmm. Because when you use that to the productivity and, to enhance productivity in a Latin American talent, you get so much in return from Latin American. We're passionate.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. Oh, great insight. I wanted to dive into the organization of localization. So let's say you're a software product company. Where does localization fit in? Does this are they working closely with the product manager? Are there ways you can measure effectiveness of localization? Are there certain KPIs? How are they maybe interacting with the engineers? Can you shed more light on that?
Absolutely. I can give you a before COVID and post COVID perspective because COVID pretty much came to change a lot of the aspects of these processes among the departments within a company. Unfortunately, before COVID, localization was an afterthought. It was like, oh, we already have the product, we launched it, it's already in the market, but now we want to target this particular niche or market. And when you take into consideration that the language, the Spanish language in the US, by speakers, by number of speakers, it's huge. That is no longer a niche. That it's a need and a requirement. And if you bring it to Latin America, it's a must to have it localized in Spanish, at least a standard Spanish. So now it's not so much as an afterthought, like, oh, we already have the product, now let's adapt it. That when you have a product and then you adapt it, that creates some, let's say, barriers or areas of opportunity, because when the product was developed, it was thought out to be in English. And sometimes I can give you a practical example, like if it's software or if it's an app, it's been developed for a particular keyboard in English, and they never thought about including the letter ñ, the little and with a dash on top. That ñ it's in Spanish, but when it was developed, it was not thought out to be important. And then when you have to localize it, you have to go back to the code, to the core of the programming, if it's an app, if it's a software, and that gets expensive. So we see a trend now. Companies are actually, as I mentioned, this Chinese company coming to Mexico, they're already implementing localization as a first step. They want to localize the content first and then implement it. So now we see a different approach. Companies are including the localization department together with the developers, front end, back end, and together with the marketing campaign guys and to the designers, the user experience and to design, user design. It's all together and they're at the same level. When before it was something that was outsourced once the product was out. So that it's great that it's been implemented now. There are so many ways to keep track if you know if your localization has been successful, the KPIs, and there are ways to measure how you're impacted that particular language or that particular market. There are so many measurables or ways to keep track. And there's also I would say there's an area and opportunity if I can give an advice to any CEO out there or any project manager out there, especially to you guys in design, when you make a software, guys in localization, there is a phenomenon in localization that's called text augmentation. When you develop an app or a software or a user interface, and let's say you want to add some feature that says on or off. You want to click on and off an option on your phone. But on and off, it's just off is 3 letters, on it's 2 letters. But in Spanish, you don't have those options for just 2 letters. You need to say something like activar, desactivar. So those are a lot more letters. That's called text augmentation. So the designers, they said, okay, it's on and off. So this is how many characters I'm going to use for this particular interface. But when we try to put it in Spanish, it doesn't make sense. So they don't understand why is it that we need to change it. So my advice would be you need to keep an open mind and know that the whole process, it's actually part of a big thing that needs to be integrated all together. And one of the reasons is not so much that the designers don't want to be flexible, but one of the reasons is that the localization tools we use are already templates or pre-programmed software that doesn't give you the option to change that particular feel or design. So one of the reasons why big companies are taking localization in-house and user experience design in-house as well, because that way they don't depend on commercial software and they can change it. So my advice would be keep an open mind, give localization a chance, and you will definitely see the difference in revenue, in your KPIs, and in especially in the brand recognition and the customer loyalty.
So Julio, I'm really excited. I'm going to be visiting your home city, Mexico City, in a few weeks. Other listeners of the show, it might be their first time going too. what should we be prepared for? What should we do? What should we try? Give us your first timer's guide to Mexico City.
Oh my god. Um, I'm so excited for you because Mexico City is my favorite city in the whole world. I've been lucky enough to have lived and visited and stayed in 47 countries, and still Mexico City is my favorite. Um, my first and most important advice I can give you is whatever bookings and reservations you've made, go and change them so you can stay 2 extra weeks, because you're going to need a lot of time to do the main things to do around Mexico City. It's huge. And there is always something going on. So, God, I would have to know a little bit of what is it that you prefer. If are you into art and history? Because Mexico City, it's like a history every corner. Around the corner, you can find something that's been, an Asian civilization, or my favorite part, the food. It's
Yes.
everywhere you go, the food is great. So, God, yeah, change your schedule and stay 2 more weeks because you're gonna need it. It doesn't matter if you stay here for a month. After that, you want to stay longer.
Yeah. Are there any particular restaurants that are top of mind for you, or people come to visit you and you always take them there?
Yes. Oh my God, the list is long, but try as much as you can the street food.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's good. It's great. It's it's one of my favorites. I know you've been to the Philippines,
Hmm.
and you've spent time there, so um, multiply that by 10, and that's how good it is. So also, I might be biased because right now I'm in Sonora, and I love the food here in Sonora, and it's all about the meat. As you know, in Monterrey and the north of Mexico, it's all about the meat and beef. So there is a restaurant in Mexico City that opened from Sonora. It's called Palominos, and whatever you pick from the menu, it's a guarantee that you're gonna love it. It's every day they fly in the beef from Sonora directly because it's fresh and it's really good. Palominos, that's one. And you have to try the corn on a stick, on a cup. Have you tried that before?
Not in Mexico, so I'm excited for this.
Oh, that's one of my favorites.
Yes, yes.
And if you see anything on the street, just go try it. It's a whole
Good,
treat.
good, good. I love the attitude. I love the energy, and
Oh, it's because I'm thinking of it.
I'm sure after this show you'll have to go out and find some. Um,
Oh, yes.
and last question for you, just as a expert linguist, someone who's definitely had your share of U.S. culture. Are there any words or phrases that you particularly enjoy from English?
Words or phrases? Yes, quite a few. When I first came to the States, I was part of a scholarship to study college there, so I had not gone out of my small town in Sonora. So I was growing up in here, never been out of state, and all of a sudden I'm there in Philadelphia at UPenn, and encountering, facing and immersed in all these idioms. So for me, it was so fascinated that I actually full a whole notebook with all the idioms that I could, that I was being immersed into. There's so many. Some of them are sort of dirty words, but one of my favorites are the pronunciations, because back then it was so hard for me to pronounce, and because of my accent. So one of my favorite words is hypotenuse. I'm not sure if I'm getting that right because every now and then I have to check the pronunciation. Also, there is this. It's a silly word, but it's unavailable.
Okay.
If I go to the linguistic side of it and the linguistic part, the components for the pronunciation as a Mexican, it's it's not easy. So unavailable, it's one. And then theater, Mexicans, it's so hard for us to pronounce a TH.
Yes.
You know, in Spain, it's a lot easier because of the list, but we don't have it. So theater, it's another word. And an idiom would be, I just was thinking about this idiom. I forgot what it was, but it's very literal. I'm thinking of the one in Spanish, and I forgot the one in English. But yeah, there's so many, so many. And as I was saying earlier, I was part of this scholarship, and I was, which is a funny story. I'm not sure if as a tangent here, I was recruited by a U.S. pilot program they had back then after 9/11 with the UN to be trained as an intelligence officer. And one of my first assignments was to create a database of idioms in Spanish so the intelligence community could filter those in their databases and their intelligence gathering. And there are so many in Spanish that as a everyday speaker you don't get to see. And but something that people usually don't know or are not aware of, for every idiom we have in Spanish, there are three in American English, not British English, three in American English.
That's funny.
So I always tell anyone who's trying to learn English, start with the idioms. It's going to get you there faster.
Good advice. I love it. Well, Julio, this has been a blast. I really, really enjoyed your energy, your passion for localization, and so much more in life. Thanks so much for coming onto the show. Let me thank our sponsor as well, Plug Technologies. That's plugg.tech. Great way to connect talent like Julio to growing U.S. companies. This is the Nearshore Cafe podcast. Thanks again, Julio.
Thank you, Brian.
And we'll see you next time.